Senator Rand Paul is facing some heat after a recent report showing that his wife had bought stock in a company that was treating COVID-19 but failed to report it. Oh no. On Wednesday, the Washington Post reported that 16 months ago, during the height of the pandemic before the vaccines, the wife of Senator Rand Paul bought stock in Gilead Sciences, the company behind a broad-spectrum antiviral called remdesivir that was used to treat COVID-19 before vaccines were widely available. Now, Rand Paul did not report this as required by law. And of course, he's going to throw his wife under the bus, which is fun. But according to the law, members of Congress have 45 days to report stock purchases, which means that Paul has been in violation of stock disclosure rules, or the Stock Act, for more than a year. And so let me just be clear where I stand here. I don't think any senator should own stock. I think that's ridiculous. There's a clear conflict of interest. But let me get into the details. And before I also add, lock him up. The investment, but especially the delayed reporting of it, alarmed experts in corporate and securities law, who said it undermined trust in the government. What trust? And raised questions about whether Paul's family had profited from non-public information about the looming health emergency and plans by U.S. government to combat it, writes Washington Post reporter Isaac Stanley Becker. So that's important because they had the information about COVID-19 and the possible impacts on the economy, as well as, of course, people's lives. And what did they do with that information? Instead of making it public, they and many other senators, including Democrats, went and made stock purchases or, shuffled around their portfolios instead of letting us know. And by the way, as I'm going to mention later on in the story, there were Republicans putting out press releases about COVID-19, say, oh, yeah, no, totally, it's going to be fine, while secretly trading stock. It's amazing that in the short time since then, we have completely forgotten about all of this. On to the next crisis. Mainstream media, why are you still not talking about these stock disclosures? Anyway, so now, according to that same Washington Post article, several senators had sold large amounts of stocks in January or February of last year, prompting a handful of insider trading probes. Most of those investigations had concluded last spring, according to notifications from the Justice Department to the lawmakers under scrutiny. So now, like I said, why is this even legal? It should be considered insider trading. A lot of these congressmen, all of them should step down, and we should have strict rules preventing anyone from owning stock who works for the government. It doesn't matter if it's managed by somebody else. It is a conflict of interest. It is corruption when you can own shares of companies that you will be making decisions over as a public representative. You're a public servant. You're supposed to fucking act like it. All right? Another good example, by the way, before I get back to Rand Paul, is Senator Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin literally makes double his congressional salary from investments in fossil fuel companies. And as a result, of course, he tried to tank or threatened to tank the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. And I said, oh, it's too expensive. I can't afford. I don't think we as a country can afford that. Oh, look, inflation, whatever. No, what he wants to do is to gum up the works to stop that from passing, so that it would have to go back to negotiations of where he could try to strip out the climate provisions alongside with the Republicans. Why? Because once again, he has his personal investments and he's being lobbied by fossil fuel corporations. And it's horrible. It's made even worse, by the way, by the recent IPCC report, which says we absolutely have to do decarbonization as soon as we can, as soon as possible. And here you have the Biden administration and people like Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, that are still trying to, and look, Joe Biden doesn't get off the hook as well. He may have canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, but he still approved Line 3, which is another tar sands pipeline. He is not doing good for the environment as well, and continues to renew and sign leases for fracking. He refuses to ban fracking. And so here we have a situation where, again, you have all this corruption going on, all this influence by fossil fuel companies and large corporations in our government. And owning stock is a part of that. It's a I don't know if it's a large part of that, but it's definitely a part of that corruption. All right. Back to Rand Paul. Rand Paul, and this again, this is a great example of the corruption of having and a good reason why we should not have any sort of congressman owning any stock anywhere. Paul, as a result, has repeatedly attacked the science of public health restrictions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. He has demanded that Dr. Fauci, the nation's top advisor on pandemic, answer conspiracy theories about so-called gain of function. He might want to have a gain of function performed on his brain, because it doesn't seem to have much. And these conspiracies, of course, go back to, Dr. Fauci was in Wuhan, and he was directing this lab. I mean, this is straight out of, Marjorie Taylor Greene's insane playbook. But he's echoing this too, that we were engineering the virus, or Fauci was engineering the virus in order to, release it and sit back and laugh maniacally about it? It's insane. He also claimed that people wearing masks are science deniers, urged mass disobedience against the CDC, and this week got temporarily kicked off YouTube. I talked about that earlier, for spreading medical misinformation. Now, you might ask, well, how is this evidence of corruption? Maybe he's just a dumbass. Think about it this way. The more people that are seriously sick with COVID-19, the more need there would be for treatments like remdesivir. Meaning more profit for Gilead, meaning more dividends for Rand Paul. Talk about the money. I mean, you got to follow it. Follow the money. You think he's taking these positions because he knows better than the doctors? I mean, look, he's a self-certified eye doctor. So, I don't know. But I do know he doesn't know shit about epidemiology. You know what he's talking about. It doesn't matter to him who dies. Rand Paul's got to try to make a buck. And the reason he didn't report it is because it looks pretty bad. Now, of course, he's going to come back and do an excuse, as I mentioned. He's going to throw his wife under the bus, which is fun. Kelsey Cooper, spokeswoman for Paul, said the senator completed a reporting form for his wife's investment last year, but learned only recently, while preparing an annual disclosure, that the form had not been transmitted. So I guess maybe it's less throwing his wife under the bus, or maybe he's throwing himself under the bus for not sending it out, or his wife, whatever. I don't know, but he's trying to blame something. He had sought guidance later on from the Senate Ethics Committee and filed the supplemental report along with an annual disclosure on Wednesday. Oops, I just forgot this very important thing that could, implicate me for corruption. Okay. And now, she also said that Paul's wife, Kelly, who was an author and former communications consultant, had lost money on the investment, which she made with her own earnings. The purchase was between $1,000 and $15,000 of stock in Gilead, which makes the antiviral drug known as remdesivir, as I mentioned. And so, well, if that's true and she lost money, well, that just means she's a terrible investor. Oof. All that for nothing. Sad. Well done. Now, look, some of you might be angry that I'm calling him corrupt, but understand that's what Washington is. All but a few exceptions, all of Washington is corrupt. Now, remember, before the vaccines, there were people that were pushing hydroxychloroquine that ended up having investments in the companies that made hydroxychloroquine. This is not an accident. They all had information on the inside. They were already briefed about this. And then, as I said, instead of telling people, instead of warning the public, they went out and made their own, switched out their own portfolios. Now, another example of that is Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis holds a major financial stake in several of the pharmaceutical producers of hydroxychloroquine, including Sanofi and Novartis. And of course, Trump himself had investments, and that's why he was pushing hydroxychloroquine. And I believe, I'm not entirely 100% sure, but I'm guessing that Rand Paul was also pushing hydroxychloroquine at the time. Fun. You also had Richard Burr, another congressman, Kelly Loeffler, who was married to New York State Stock Exchange head Jeffrey Sprecher, who after this meeting had bought stock in these very same companies, as well as medical supply companies, following the January 24, 2020 meeting about the threat of COVID-19. Senator David Perdue also started buying about $185,000 in stock in DuPont, a company that makes personal protective equipment, or PPE, on the same day as the Senate briefing up to March 2nd. Additionally, John Hoeven of North Dakota purchased $250,000 in health science companies in January, 5 days after attending the briefing about the pandemic. And on February 7th, Senator Burr, as I mentioned before, stated in an open editorial on how the government could respond to coronavirus and said that, quote, "Luckily, we have a framework in place that has put us in a better position than any other country to respond to a public health threat like the coronavirus." However, on February 13th, he and his wife sold about $628,000 and $1.7 million worth of stock through 33 transactions. And on February 27th, Burr stated that there is one thing I can tell you about this. It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything we have seen in recent history. And this was at a Capitol Hill luncheon, and a statement was later leaked on a secret recording. So, yeah. And on March 19th, ProPublica had published an article showing that Burr had sold stock shortly before the correction, and Loeffler, Jim Inhofe, and Dianne Feinstein stock selling was also reported. So, this is why congressmen should not be allowed to own stock. 100%. Rand Paul, I understand the stories about Rand Paul, but Rand Paul, I think, is no more corrupt than a lot of them. He just tried to hide it and got busted. Stone cold busted. But then they all did. But they still did it because, well, I guess they were tasked to investigate themselves. And when you let that happen, well, golly gee, wouldn't you know it? They didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. But again, Rand Paul, what makes it more insidious than just not being honest about coronavirus and how dangerous it is, like Richard Burr, he actually is now urging people to do the wrong thing. The wrong thing that's going to end up helping them get either sick or killed, all in order, I guess, to make back the money from his failed investments. And that makes Rand Paul an absolutely loathsome, corrupt, disgusting human being. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.